All right, and so as people are coming in, I'm JL. I work at the Randall Library. I am here in Tina, the director's stead, as she is on vacation. I'm here with Rick Lent from Sustainable Stow and Anna Vanderspek, and she will introduce herself in more detail. So just some housekeeping things as we're waiting for our full group to join. As you, I'm sure, have seen, we're recording this for future viewing. Please do keep yourself muted during the presentation. You can use the reactions button at the bottom to raise hands for questions or put it in the chat. We're pleased to continue our monthly partnership with Sustainable Stow. And I think we've got everybody in for the moment. I'll keep an eye on that. But Rick, if you want to get started, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, JL. Just I'll mention it here, maybe at the close too. So as many of you know this, we meet every month at the library on Zoom on a climate topic on the third Wednesday night. Next month, we're going to be meeting with Stow's relatively new Green Advisory Committee and learning about what they're really doing with their planning. Anyways, different topic every month. Last month, we had our state representative, Kate Hogan, and all of our programs are available through Stow TV after the fact. So tonight, we're really glad to have Anna Vanderspek from Green Energy Consumers Alliance with us. I'm not going to attempt to describe Green Energy Consumers Alliance because every time I turn around, they've got another program. They're doing some great work in the whole sustainability area for consumers. So I'll introduce Anna. Please explain GECA.
I'm happy to. First, a big thank you for the invitation to come out tonight, so to speak, even if we're all on Zoom. What I have prepared today is a presentation that should take somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. That is basically an electric vehicles 101. I'll talk about why they're a good idea. I'll talk about important things to know, like how charging works and the different incentives and rebates that are out there. And then I'll talk a little bit about how to get one, particularly right now. I do definitely welcome questions. If you at any point are confused, raise your hand or shout out if you want me to explain something, but we'll also have plenty of time at the end for a general Q&A. And I think I recognize a couple names here of people who have EVs, so we'll hopefully maybe have some real life people who drive electric who can talk about their experience a little bit too. But I will start by sharing my screen and getting started. So as Rick mentioned, I work for a nonprofit called Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We go by Green Energy Consumers for short. We are not GECA. Otherwise, my boss and board will be very angry if I call us GECA. We're Green Energy Consumers, and our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. What that means in practice is that we have lots of different programs and services that help people access various clean energy technologies. So we've got a green powered program. We've got help for you to go solar. We've got a program about cold climate air source heat pumps. And with all of those programs, we interact both with consumers and with suppliers, and use that experience to inform advocacy work that we do at the state and local level. So we do work in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've been around for 40 years, and I specifically work on our transportation stuff. So I have one foot in our program, which is called Drive Green, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But I also do our transportation advocacy work in Massachusetts. So working to get better state policy to make electric vehicles or EVs more affordable and accessible, but also to build out charging infrastructure and electrify public transit and medium and heavy duty vehicles and all the rest. So that's kind of a big picture intro. As I mentioned, the sort of first topic for today is why electric vehicles. Hold questions about charging until section 2, because that's where we'll get into that. But we'll kind of start big picture and talk about why a climate organization is thinking about cars at all. So a lot of people think that electric vehicles are still quite dirty because of the mix of generators on our electric grid, but that is actually not true. There is great data from the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a tool where you can type in your zip code and they will show you the comparative emissions of different types of vehicles. So the average gas-powered car emits about 381 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. And if you have a plug-in hybrid vehicle, which is the type of vehicle that has a battery that you can and do charge by plugging it into a wall outlet, but also has a backup gas tank, you can cut your emissions in half on a per mile basis. And if you go all the way to a battery electric vehicle, you can cut your emissions by more than 3/4, down to just 96 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. This data is New England specific because the New England states share one electric grid. Massachusetts as a whole has cleaner electricity than this because of really great state laws known as the Renewable Energy Standard or the Clean Energy Standard that require investor-owned utilities to add an increasing amount of renewable energy to their mix every year. But as I've just learned or been reminded, you all have a municipal utility with a different electric mix. So these numbers would need to be adjusted a little bit for you. But if there's any folks in the audience who do have National Grid or Eversource as your electric utility, you can choose 100% local renewable energy. This is sort of a shameless plug for one of our other programs, Green Powered, and then charge your car effectively with wind power. And that's one of the great things about electric vehicles is that a vehicle that you buy now will be cleaner 5 years from now because there will be more renewable energy on the grid. And that's something that gas-powered cars definitely can't do, magically get cleaner over time. All of this is particularly important because transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions at this point in Massachusetts and also Rhode Island. We give presentations in Rhode Island a lot, so there's 2 pie charts on this slide. Over the past 20, 30 years, we've actually done a pretty good job of cleaning up our electric sector, or basically adding more renewable energy and decommissioning the most polluting power plants. There's a lot more work that needs to be done there, as well as in heating and buildings, but transportation has really not changed. And if anything, it's gotten larger. There's more and more cars, people are driving more and more miles, and vehicles are getting larger. So any gains that we've made with corporate fleet efficiency standards on the federal level have kind of been discounted by the fact that cars are bigger and we're driving further. So we really, really need to tackle transportation emissions if we want to meet any of our climate goals. And the relevant climate mandate really to keep in mind, or the one that we have front and center in our brains all the time, is that Massachusetts by law has to reduce economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions 50% under 1990 levels by 2030. So 50% by 2030 is what we have to do. And there's no way we can do that without really tackling transportation. A lot of people also ask about the life cycle emissions from electric vehicles because electric vehicle manufacturing does require the manufacturing of a big old lithium-ion battery. And that does require more energy in the manufacturing stage. But the good news is that over the lifetime of the vehicle, there's a very clear emissions reduction, which the Union of Concerned Scientists recently released a report on. So this is a figure we stole right out of that report, and it's linked at the bottom, and I'll share the slides after this webinar. But basically, the Union of Concerned Scientists looked at the emissions from battery manufacturing, vehicle manufacturing, and vehicle operation. for different types of vehicles. They basically broke vehicles up into cars and trucks. And the orange bit is the vehicle manufacturing. So you can see that that's pretty similar between gas and electric options, and just bigger for trucks, which makes sense. But electric cars have that additional blue bar, which is battery manufacturing. So you can see that manufacturing emissions are slightly higher, but there's a huge reduction when you look at vehicle operation. And this data is looking nationally at the electric mix. So in Massachusetts, that reduction would be even bigger because our electricity is cleaner than lots of other parts of the country. So both on a per mile basis and on a lifetime basis, environmentally, if you have to have a car, the electric car is the clear winner. One thing we always want to point out as well is that climate change is huge and terrifying and a threat in lots of different ways, including public health. But even if you take climate change out of the picture, there's a clear public health reason to switch away from combustion vehicles to electric vehicles. So along with the carbon dioxide that comes out of a gas-powered car's tailpipe come lots of nasty things that really harm human health. So you might have heard of particulate matter or ground level ozone or NOx and SOx emissions. These are all things that cause or exacerbate asthma and emphysema and brain and heart conditions that cause a lot of damage in terms of human suffering, but also in terms of healthcare costs. So the American Lung Association regularly issues reports on the impacts of what if we electrified all the vehicles, what would that look like? And the savings are always in the billions of dollars of what we could save in terms of healthcare costs, but all of that is also real people who don't have to have an asthma attack or don't have worsening emphysema or what have you. So that's another thing to keep in mind on the sort of big picture societal front. And the reason for all of this, these benefits, has partially to do with the fact that you can fuel an electric car with green power. But the other part is that electric cars are so much more efficient than gas-powered cars. So gas-powered cars actually waste about 80% of the energy stored in every gallon of gasoline, which every time I remind myself of that statistic, it is staggering. Because we've been working on internal combustion engines for over 100 years, and we're still at 20% efficiency. The rest is lost mostly to friction and heat. Electric cars are closer to 60, 70, 80% efficient. So for every unit of energy that you're putting into the fuel tank, in this case, the battery, you're losing less to waste. And one easy way to sort of wrap your brain around that is to compare the miles per gallon and the miles per gallon electric of popular cars. So MPGE is a measure of how far an electric car will drive on the amount of energy that's stored in a gallon of gasoline, which happens to be 33.7 kilowatt hours of electricity. So on the graph on the right, you can see some popular gas-powered car models get somewhere between 20 and 30 miles per gallon. Traditional hybrids, in other words, ones that don't plug in, get somewhere between 40 and 50 miles per gallon. And then anything with a plug blows everything else out of the water. So the Mitsubishi Outlander is one of the larger plug-in hybrid SUVs that doesn't have a whole lot of electric range, but it still has an equivalent of 74 miles per gallon. And then if you look at some of the pure battery electric vehicles, they're well over 100 miles per gallon equivalent. And this is sort of the principle that explains why emissions are so much lower, because for every unit of emissions, you're driving further in an electric car. That efficiency also underlies a second principle. So we're shifting now from sort of societal benefits to benefits to you, the consumer, is that fuel costs are much, much lower for people who drive electric vehicles than people who drive gas-powered cars. So we have a cute little schematic here with some math that I hope is fun. So if you look at an average gas-powered car that gets 30 miles per gallon, and let's say prices are at $4.54, which they were the last time we updated this PowerPoint, that comes out to 15 cents per mile to drive that gas-powered car if we're just looking at fuel costs. An electric car, most of them have an efficiency rating of somewhere around 0.3 kilowatt hours per mile. And in most of Massachusetts, and this is a big asterisk, electricity prices are around 26 cents per kilowatt hour right now and actually expected to go up. But wherever they are 26 cents per kilowatt hour, that comes out to about 8 cents per mile driving fuel costs for an electric vehicle. So that right there is a cut in about half. You all, if you live in Stow, have a municipal light plant and are enjoying much lower electricity prices than the rest of the state. So you can plug in your own electric price into this formula to figure out how many cents per mile you will have to pay. But it'll be much, much lower than those of us who live in National Grid or Eversource territory, which means that this financial benefit is only strengthened for you. But if we take these assumptions and say that we're driving 12,000 miles per year, switching to an EV from a gas-powered car results in over $800 of savings per year, which is not nothing for sure. And if you're interested and want to sort of look at this math on your own, I've linked to our methodology page where you can learn a little bit more about the assumptions that we're making here. Another way to look at this is how far will a dollar get you? And using the same assumptions on the previous slide, a dollar would get you about 6.6 miles in a gas car, but well over $12 in an electric vehicle. And again, for all of you who have much lower electricity prices, that dollar will get you even further than this in an electric car. To show you that we're not just making this up, not just making up our own numbers, here is a graph from the EPA. They looked at the annual fuel cost ranges for different types of light duty vehicles. This is from 2021, so before gas prices did their crazy up and down thing again. And you can see here that electric vehicles have a smaller range of prices and lower prices. So gas cars, the annual fuel costs from this study range anywhere from $1,000 to nearly $5,000, and that accounts for the fact that there's lots of different gas-powered cars with lots of different efficiencies. So a Chevy Suburban is going to have a different annual fuel cost than a Toyota Prius, or I guess a Honda Civic. We'll say a Honda Civic. The next step up to hybrid electric vehicles reduces the range of prices and also the prices. So the low end is $700, the high end is around $3,000. Plug-in hybrids, again, lowers the range and makes it smaller. And then all electric vehicles are less than $1,000 in terms of annual fuel costs. So this is just another way of looking at sort of the same concept. The sort of flip side to this coin is that maintenance costs are also much lower for electric vehicles, mostly because they are simply simpler machines. So an internal combustion engine has hundreds of parts that are moving around to translate the energy in basically a controlled explosion into forward motion. An electric vehicle does not have all of those moving parts. So there's fewer things that can break or go wrong or corrode or need replacement. The battery, motor, and electronic systems themselves don't require much maintenance at all. And it's really unlikely that you'll ever have to replace your battery. The batteries are warranted for 8 years or 100,000 miles at a minimum. And if there's going to be some sort of defect because of manufacturing, it'll happen in those first 8 years. And otherwise, the battery is expected to last as long as the car. And preliminary data shows that batteries are really performing quite well. So they'll lose a little bit in range every year, but they will last as long as the car. And when you add all of that up, it really results in savings on a total cost of ownership basis. The study that I have a screenshot of on the left came out a couple years ago from Consumer Reports, but it's excellent because Consumer Reports looked at the real life costs of thousands of EV drivers to do a whole bunch of math and figure out what those maintenance savings look like. And they found that on average, you cut your lifetime maintenance and repair costs in half if you're looking at an EV instead of a gas-powered car. And that is held up by the testimony of lots of EV drivers that have come through our program. There's something got weird with the formatting on this slide, but at the bottom, you can see a quote from one of our EV drivers who basically was like, no more stops at the gas station, oil changes, all of this, I don't have to worry about. Why would I ever go back to that? For those of you who like math, here's another fun graph. This shows you the maintenance costs associated with scheduled maintenance for different types of vehicles. ICE V is internal combustion engine vehicle, so it's an average gas-powered car. HEV is a hybrid, so a traditional hybrid that doesn't plug in. PHEV is plug-in hybrid, so a vehicle that has a gas tank and a combustion engine, but also a battery that charges from a wall outlet. And then finally, battery electric vehicle. And what is the most striking part of this graph that we like to include is that there's that whole section of red at the top of the first three columns that just does not exist with a battery electric vehicle. So you don't have to worry about transmission service, spark plug, oxygen sensors, or timing belt because they're just simply not needed in electric vehicles, nor do you need to worry about an oil filter or a fuel filter. Because the vehicle is just so much simpler. And so on this graph, it was closer to 40 something percent savings instead of 50%, but it still shows you that a lot of those savings come from the fact that the machines are fundamentally different and they don't have the same parts. Last but not least, I'll mention that EVs are really fun to drive. And I say this as a person who actually does not really care about cars. I care a lot about climate change, but I don't really worry about horsepower and things like that. But if you are a person who does, you should definitely, and even if you're not, you should go test drive an EV or ride with someone if you can. The acceleration is so much smoother. They're so quiet. They've got all the latest safety features, lane departure warnings, all of that. They're really lovely. My 94-year-old grandmother calls my parents' Bolt the nice car and has a distinct preference for it. So if you have a chance to go test drive an EV, you definitely should because they really do have a different feel from gas-powered cars. I'll move on now to things you should know, which will mostly be about charging, range, and incentives. First thing you should know is that range anxiety is a thing of the past. Range anxiety is the fear that you're going to suddenly run out of charge and not be able to make it home because you're stranded somewhere. There's a couple of reasons why we think it's a thing of the past. One is that there's much more charging than most people think, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Secondly, the manufacturers of these vehicles know that that is your biggest fear, and so they've invested really heavily into sophisticated battery management software that at all times will display on the dashboard of the vehicle how many miles of range you have left. Usually they'll do a low estimate, a medium estimate, and a high estimate. So anytime you're driving, you'll see, okay, you've got 200 miles left. Now you have 170 miles left. And these systems are smart enough to take into account things like the weather. If it's really cold, you'll need more kilowatt hours of energy to go a certain distance. And some of these vehicles are smart enough to notice if you are a driver who likes to really accelerate and then slam on the brakes, it'll adjust that mileage estimate down if you are burning through power too fast. And then finally, the electric vehicles that are on the market now have way more range than most people drive in a day. So most people in Massachusetts drive about 30 miles a day. And the battery electric vehicles that are coming out at this point have well over 200, if not 300 miles per charge. So that means you can do your daily driving, charge up overnight, or maybe even just a couple times a week, and you're fine. A lot of people still have the image of the early Nissan Leaf that only got 80 miles per charge, but those days are long gone, and the models that are out there now are really work for a lot of people. Now we get into the good stuff. So things you should know about charging. First thing is that there's 3 basic levels. Any vehicle you purchase will come with a cord that you can plug into the vehicle on one end and plug into a normal household 120-volt outlet or 110-volt outlet on the other end. And that is called a level 1 charge. It's also known as a trickle charge because it's the slowest type of charging, and it'll add about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging. I would recommend or encourage you not to discount this right away because it's the slowest type. If you drive about 40 miles a day and are able to plug in overnight, then you can recoup those 40 miles with 10 hours of trickle charging overnight and you'll be golden. So that actually works for a lot more people than you might think. If you do want to be able to charge faster or have a bigger battery, you can consider level 2 charging. This is a 220-volt outlet, which is the same kind of outlet you would have for an all-electric clothes dryer, for example. And it adds about 11 to 25, 30 miles of range per hour spent charging. It depends on the car model, how quickly it can charge. And if you want to install this at home, you would go and buy a unit, which you can do at a home improvement store or online, and then have an electrician hook it up to a 240-volt line. But a lot of the public charging that you see is also level 2 charging, and I'll show you in a minute how to find that kind of charging. And then finally, the third type of charging is called DC fast charging. The DC stands for direct current. Some people call it level 3 charging. And this is the super high powered charging that you see at rest stops along highways and places like that, where you might pull up for half an hour and get 90 or 120 miles, depending on what vehicle you drive. This is not a type of charging that you can install at home. This is really high power, so you're only going to find it in public areas. But this is what you would use if you want to go on a road trip, which you absolutely can do. In terms of plug types, the first thing to know is that Tesla has its own proprietary port. So all of the Tesla vehicles have a Tesla port, and you can only plug in with a Tesla cord, basically, unless you have an adapter. All of the other manufacturers use the same standard for level 1 and level 2 charging, which is called the J1772 port. And if you look at the top right-hand corner of the slide, you'll see that it is basically 5 prongs, 3 of them are bigger and 2 of them are smaller. And that just means that's what the port looks like on the vehicle, and that's what the cord that you plug into the vehicle looks like. For DC fast charging, the industry has been split, but we're at a point now where it's kind of converging on one standard. So up until now, there have been 2 standards. There's been the J1772 combo or SAE combo, which is the one in the middle. You can see that it's just the J1772 with 2 larger prongs added underneath. And that has been used primarily by American and European manufacturers. Asian manufacturers up until now have used a different standard called the CHAdeMO, which is the bottom right hand. But it seems like they are shifting over to the J1772 for the American market. What this means in practice is if you are driving around and you want a DC fast charge, you just have to pull up to a machine that has the right plug type for your car. But the good news is that most DC fast charging stations have a cord for each type. So it's just a matter of finding the right cord for your car. The only place you will probably run into a DC fast charging station that is only for one type of car is if you're at a car dealership and they've just installed the type for their vehicles. But it's really easy online to see which one is which. So in practice, this isn't as difficult or confusing as it might appear on this slide. So now you can charge on the go. There are lots of different charging network operators who are building out charging across the country. So some of the bigger ones you might have heard of are ChargePoint or Electrify America or EVgo. These are all companies that are building out charging and trying to capitalize on this new market, basically. The resource we point people to is called PlugShare, and that's where these screenshots are from. PlugShare is platform neutral and it's crowdsourced. So you see all of the different types of stations on the same map, regardless of if they're ChargePoint or EVgo or what have you. It's also the kind of website where if you zoom in, more of these little arrows will pop up. So I definitely encourage going to plugshare.com and playing around with it. You can plug in any address and it'll show you what's nearby. But on these screenshots, anything that is green is level 2, and anything that is orange is DC fast charging or level 3. So you can see that the DC fast charging really hugs major travel corridors. It's along the Mass Pike, and the state is receiving federal money to build out the DC fast charging network even more. But there's a lot more charging than people think, including on the Cape and in Rhode Island, and more is being built all the time. So I definitely recommend you check out those resources to see what's near you. And it also has the ability to plan a trip. So if you regularly drive somewhere and you want to see if you could do that in an electric vehicle, it'll show you the charging options along the route. So you can kind of plan that out. However, most people charge at home. Right now, about 80% of EV drivers, if not more, charge at home. So we have a guide to help walk you through the process. If you know you want an electric car and you want to install a level 2 charging station, or if you're not really sure and you want to understand what questions to ask yourself, what questions to ask an electrician, how to assess whether your panel can handle it, we have a guide for that. So the link is on this website. Again, I'll share these slides. But when we surveyed our members and asked, did you install a charging station? And if so, how much did it cost? It typically costs around $1,200 for the purchase and installation of the charging unit, including an electrician's labor. It can be much less than that if you happen to have a 240 volt line near where you park already. You just need to buy a unit and basically have it hooked up. And it can be higher than that if you really need to increase service to your home, or like draw a 240 volt line way beyond where it currently exists in your home. But this guide exists to help you figure that out. If you happen to live in an apartment or condo, this is more complicated because you've got lots more decision makers who have to get on board. So we have a couple of different resources, one for folks who live in apartments and condos, and one for them to basically hand to the landlord or the condo, the board association, whatever it is, that talk about the benefits of installing EV charging, and also the different incentive programs that are available. One big asterisk on this is that the incentive programs are likely going to change, or definitely going to change, as a result of the IRA. And then a lot of what we talk about in these guides is the programs from National Grid and Eversource, which is less relevant for folks in your area, but might still be a helpful resource. Okay, now we get to incentives, and I will say in advance that this is confusing. So if you have questions at the end of this, that is okay. We have a blog post that explains it, but there's a lot happening all of a sudden. So the first thing that you should know is that there is a federal tax credit for the purchase of an electric vehicle. It was put in place during the Obama years. The way it was set up was that once a manufacturer sold 200,000 electric cars in the US, it would phase out. You might have heard that Tesla and General Motors no longer qualify for a federal tax credit, and that's because they hit that phase out cap and have completed the phase out period. That federal tax credit is up to $7,500. It's up to because it depends on the battery size of the vehicle. So some of the plug-in hybrids that have smaller batteries only qualify for smaller rebates. And it also depends on your personal tax liability. If you don't owe $7,500 in federal taxes, the IRS won't write you a check for the difference, and you can't carry it over from one year to another. So that was the old rebate, or the old federal tax credit. Then President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act on August 16th, and that added one new qualification for this year, which is that the final assembly location of the vehicle has to be within North America. So there is a list that I'll share of what vehicles have that final assembly location in the United States. And on the US Department of Energy's website, there's also a VIN decoder. So if you're looking at a specific vehicle, you can type in the vehicle identification number and find out where it was assembled, which will tell you whether it qualifies. So this is the state of the federal tax credit from now until December 31st of this year. And then on January 1st of next year, the new clean vehicle credit kicks in. And that has a couple of new elements. So the first is that it is valid through 2032. We're doing away with the 200,000 unit cap. It no longer matters that Tesla and General Motors have sold that many cars. It's just in place for 10 years, which is great because that gives people confidence that it'll be there when they're ready to go electric. There are new income requirements. So you can only qualify for this federal tax credit if your income is less than $150,000 if you're an individual, or $300,000 if you are filing jointly. It also, for the first time, includes fuel cell vehicles.
Was the lab for the 270 project, which is where you get
I just muted whoever that was because it didn't sound like they were talking to us. And then finally, there are new vehicle requirements that any vehicle has to meet in order to qualify. And those are complicated as well. So the first we've already talked about, it's that the final assembly location be in North America. That is already in effect. Secondly, there's a price cap. It's $80,000 for SUVs, pickup trucks, and vans, and $55,000 for sedans and hatchbacks. That kicks in on January 1st of 2023. And then finally, there are a series of mineral and battery component requirements that also kick in 2023 and then ramp up after that. Those battery requirements you might have heard about in the news have two parts. So the first is that starting in 2023, and then again ramping up later, 40% of the battery's minerals by value have to be mined or processed in North America or a country with a free trade agreement with the US or recycled in the US. You, the consumer, will not need to figure out if any particular car model or you won't have to go digging to find this. The manufacturers and the IRS basically will give us a list, I hope, in January saying these vehicles qualify, these vehicles don't. But if a vehicle qualifies for this, then it qualifies for the $3,750 worth of the federal tax credit. There's then a second component to this, which is what percentage of the battery, the value of the battery components are manufactured or assembled in North America. So one piece is about the mineral sourcing, and the second piece is about where are those components assembled. And if you meet this part, you qualify for $3,750 as well. So if a vehicle meets one, but not the other, it gets half the rebate or half the tax credit. If a vehicle meets both, then it qualifies for the full $7,500. One thing that we're particularly excited about is that starting in 2023, used electric vehicles will qualify for the federal tax credit. The majority of the population in this country does not buy new cars. So by making used cars eligible, we're making electric vehicles accessible to more people. For the used vehicle credit, the battery requirements don't apply. The credit is limited to $4,000 or 30% of the sales price, whichever is lesser. You have to buy the vehicle from a dealership in order to qualify. The vehicle must be at least 2 years old, and cost less than $25,000. The credit only applies at the first resale. So if you buy a used EV and get the credit, and then sell it, the person you sell it to cannot get that credit, even if they're buying it from a dealership. And then finally, there's a lower income threshold. So for basically it cuts the previous income threshold in half. For joint filers, it's now 150,000, and individuals, it's 75,000. One more thing that we're excited about is that in 2024, supposedly, this tax credit will be available at the point of sale. So when you're buying a car, the consumer can choose to transfer the tax credit to the dealership. This is a really big deal for people who can't shell out $7,500 and then wait 10 months to get reimbursed. So this should make buying an electric vehicle more accessible to lots more people. But exactly how this is going to work is we have a year, or the federal government has a year to figure that out, because at some point in that transaction, someone's going to need to check your income to make sure you qualify. Exactly how that's going to work with car dealers and all of that is TBD, but that's something to look forward to in 2024. So that was all the federal tax credit. I will now talk about the Massachusetts State Rebate Program, which is an incentive that you can stack on top of the federal tax credit. So Massachusetts has had a state rebate in place for several years called More EV. And the way that has been set up and is still currently set up is that if you purchase or lease a pure battery electric vehicle, you qualify for a $2,500 state rebate as long as the final sales price is under $50,000. And you qualify for a $1,500 state rebate for a plug-in hybrid as long as you still meet that final sales price and you have at least 25 miles of electric range. And the process has been, when you purchase or lease an electric vehicle, once you take possession of the car, you go to more-ev.org and fill out a form and then receive a check in the mail once they've approved your application a couple weeks later. This year, the Massachusetts State Legislature passed and Governor Baker signed into law a new climate bill that sets up a new EV incentive program with new rules. So the new rules are that there's no more rebate for plug-in hybrids. The rebate is increased from somewhere between $3,500 and $5,000. The price cap is increased because legislators recognize that EV prices, or all vehicle prices, have gone up. It extends the rebate to both new and used vehicles, and it has additional rebates for low-income drivers and people trading in a gas-powered car. And finally, it also authorizes a point of sale. We have repeatedly asked the More EV program when these changes will come into effect, because this impacts people's planning and decision-making right now. The answers that we have gotten are that there's no timeline yet, but there was recently a hearing and also an RFP issued by the Department of Energy Resources looking for someone to run this program that makes it seem like we can expect it in the new year. So I definitely don't expect these changes to happen before December or before January, and I will be thrilled if they happen in January. But for now, the old rebate program is still up and running the way it has been. And then finally, we've reached our last slide, which is how to buy an electric vehicle. And what I'm actually going to do is pull up our website and reshare my screen so I can show you in real time. Okay. So this is the Green Energy Consumers website. I'll actually start here. If you go to greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen, you can learn lots more about all of the topics that I just discussed. So if you want to go do a deep dive into incentives and read more about the federal tax credit, you can do that. If you want to really understand the different types of charging and how to find public charging, you can do that. So you can come here and learn all sorts of stuff. But when you're ready to actually look at different car models, you can click this Find New or Used button and compare different types of electric vehicles. So if we select new vehicles first and say Show Massachusetts, we'll generate a list of different vehicles for you in order by electric range. And for each one, we show you what type of vehicle it is, what the range is, Is it four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive or what? What's its efficiency rating? How quickly can it charge? What's the base price? What federal tax credit does it qualify for? What's the state rebate? What's the final cost after incentives? And then we have a little box of like important news articles, basically, if we learn something interesting that we think is relevant to someone who's looking for a car. So you can come here and learn all about the different car models that are available. You can also sort and filter. So for example, if you want a battery electric vehicle that gets at least 200 miles of range, you can check those off and we'll show you just what those options are. And then for some vehicles, we have a relationship with dealers in Massachusetts and Rhode Island who can help you actually get a car, which right now in particular is difficult because of all of the inventory and supply issues. But if you, for example, are interested in the Nissan Ariya and the Chevy Bolt, you can select the cars, learn more about the different trim levels or the different packages, check off the ones you're interested in, and then see what dealers we have that are currently able to help you actually get a car. So we've been running this program since 2016. We used to have a lot more dealers and a lot more ways to help you get a car. It's a really weird time in the car market right now. Most of what you can do is pre-order, but if you check off a dealer and then complete the sign-up form, then we will put you in touch with the right salesperson at the dealership and exist as a kind of neutral third party to help you out if you run into any issues. The last thing I want to point out before I am done is that if you are looking for a pre-owned vehicle, we have a tool to help you understand what your options are. So we have grouped together previous model years of all of these car models based on their electric range. So for example, from 2014 through to 2017, all the BMW i3 models had 81 miles of charge. But once they hit 2019, it was a higher range. So this tool lets you say, okay, I want a used electric vehicle that has at least 100 miles of range. What are my options? And you can learn about the vehicles, and then you can see what the fair purchase price is according to Kelley Blue Book. So if you're on a budget, you can sort by price and see, okay, if I am only going to spend X amount of money, these are the options, and then you can use that to go onto Carvana or whatever other site to find used cars. So that is it. Thank you for listening to that whirlwind tour. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Anna. That was great. I wish I'd seen all of that before I bought my new car. But anyways, I knew some of it, but not all of it for sure. We had 3 comments so far in the chat. I'm trying to get it up here. I'm going to start with the last one first, because I think it's a simple answer. I see a lot of Tesla charging stations not being used. Can other cars use these? Seems not, but maybe I misunderstand.
So Tesla for a very long time was very protective of its charging network. So it very distinctly built its charging network so only Tesla vehicles could use it. I have read articles that supposedly there is an adapter coming that will allow non-Tesla drivers to use Tesla charging stations. I have just not seen proof of it happening yet. And with Tesla, I always wait for it to be in front of me in real life before I believe that it's going to happen. That is a very tentative, maybe soon response to your question. But one thing I do want to underline is if you heard about all of the funding that's coming down the pike, pun kind of intended, from the federal government because of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, all of that has to be spent on stations that are accessible to everyone. So that money will be increasing the number of DC fast charging stations that any vehicle can use, not just Teslas.
Okay, next question. And by the way, I'm repeating these questions, and if you're here and you want to correct my summary of your question, please do. The next one is, do car manufacturers post their rated kilowatt hours per mile rate, like your 0.30 example showed. Do you have that source data from your slide? Jen asked
That data comes from the fueleconomy.gov website. The Federal Department of Energy maintains a website that's at fueleconomy.gov where you can compare specs from lots of different vehicle models. For example, one thing, different cars, if you look in different places, might advertise their range differently, but the range that we post is the EPA range. In Europe, different agencies that are regulatory bodies might come up with different numbers, but all of our numbers are from fueleconomy.gov.
Okay. And then we've got one, some of you may be able to see these. These are all in the chat. I'm just reading them from the chat. Elizabeth Spargo asks, what about the rare minerals needed for batteries? Is there work being done to find alternatives? Are we looking at possible environmental, political, economic issues related to getting these resources proactively?
Yes, that is a many-layered question, and I will do my best to respond to all of the layers. So, first, these batteries do require minerals and metals and rare earth minerals. There's technical distinctions between what is a rare mineral and what isn't, but I am not that much of a scientist. But all of these electric vehicles that are on the market right now are lithium-ion batteries. But they're not all the same type of battery. They have different battery chemistries. When people talk about the mining impact of creating electric vehicle batteries, mostly the conversation is about lithium and then cobalt. So lithium is, you use a lot of lithium for a lithium-ion battery. And right now, most of the reserves in the world are in Chile, in Russia, and in Australia. And to extract it is a pretty water intensive process. So there's been work done in Chile in particular to try and reduce the amount of water that is needed for that extraction. There's all sorts of, if you follow the space, you will see articles every day about people trying to find new ways of extracting lithium. There's lithium in the oceans, and there's all sorts of work being done, but a good chunk of it in the coming years will be coming from Australia in particular. They are really ramping up their production. So that is with all, no matter what we're pulling out of the earth, there's always going to be concerns there. But I think we actually wrote a blog post, which I'll put in the chat, about efforts on a national and international basis, both from government, nonprofit, and industry people to address those issues. Cobalt is another one that has gotten a lot of attention, rightly so, because electric vehicle batteries do require cobalt. But I should also say that, by the way, all of these minerals we're talking about are also in the laptops that we're all using to communicate right now, and in our cell phones, and in anything else that has a lithium-ion battery. So this is not a concern that is unique to electric vehicles. It's just they're bigger batteries, so we have to pay attention more. Cobalt has been in the news a lot because most of the world's cobalt currently comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the DRC, which is a country that has been embroiled in civil war for decades. And a lot of the mining there does not happen under good conditions. Manufacturers have responded to this by reducing the amount of cobalt and even replacing cobalt in their EV batteries, partially because of the public outcry, but also because it's really expensive and they wanted to find a cheaper way to manufacture batteries. So to kind of summarize my response, industry is trying to find alternatives, partially because these minerals are expensive and partially because they want to appear like they're good moral actors. Government is thinking about this too. I didn't spend as much time on it in the federal tax credit section as I could have, but one of the intents of those battery component requirements is to bring more of that mining here or into places that have better track records on human rights issues, and also encourage recycling so that we can reuse those precious metals instead of going out and mining more. And that the structure of that tax credit is intended to kickstart that. In addition to the federal tax credit, the IRA also has lots of funding to actually help set up those factories and bring more of this battery manufacturing to the United States so that we can effectively keep a closer eye on it. And then to your last point, and I hope I'm answering all of this in terms of like, what are we doing proactively? We have Green Energy Consumers think about this a fair amount because we're here going to solve the climate crisis. We have to electrify, and that requires tapping into this global market. But we are a small state-based nonprofit that can't influence international, like multinational companies on this. So we are reading about it, we're writing about it. There were a couple of bills filed last legislative session about battery recycling that we're looking at for the next legislative session. But the good news is that in the IRA, there's structures built in to start to address this, but we will all need to keep paying attention to it because it will keep being an issue. That was a very long answer, but I care about this topic a lot.
That's good. So another one from Alan Fierce, with respect to the income limits for the federal and state tax credits, are people who exceed that income limit completely ineligible for the credits? Or does it just phase out so that they may receive a partial credit?
For the federal tax credit, if your income exceeds that, you are completely ineligible for the federal tax credit.
Okay.
You are not, however, ineligible for the state rebate.
Okay. And that's all we have so far in the chat. Does anybody else have a question they want to raise?
I see a question about how free charging works. So
Yep.
from Mike, who I feel like should just answer the question, but I can answer it.
He's setting you up.
He is. I appreciate it. It's a nice lob. So there, I mentioned earlier, are lots of different charging networks, and what these networks do is they provide a service to site hosts who want to offer charging. So if you are a public library or a business or a mall or a gym, what have you, and you want to install a charging station, these companies can provide you with the hardware and the software to do that, but you ultimately get to decide how much you charge for electricity. So some site hosts will charge just what they paid for electricity. So in a lot of places that 26 cents per kilowatt hour. But some site hosts will offer charging for free to get you to come to their business or stay longer at their business. So if you go to plugshare.com or really any of the other websites that help you find charging, you can see which stations are free and which ones aren't. And you can pull up and just plug in. There are also so-called dumb chargers, which is just non-smart chargers, so chargers that are not hooked up to Wi-Fi or cell service. These tend to be older ones and are usually in like municipal lots where you'll find them on PlugShare and you can just roll up and plug in. But Alan, I think, will answer this question too. Or has another question.
Alan, go ahead. We can't hear you yet.
Well, I think that's true. That was not what I was going to comment about, however.
Okay.
So Anna, I was listening today to a legislative oversight hearing with Senator Barrett and Senator Cream, and they were questioning administration officials about the whole range of programs now under the CECP. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but with respect to the EV credits, Senator Barrett and Senator Cream had a couple of questions that were premised on their understanding of the federal tax credit scheme. Their belief is there will be no vehicles starting January 1st that will be eligible for any credits, federal tax credits. So part one, is that the way you read it too? But part two is this, Senator Barrett and Senator Cream were therefore pressing the administration to implement the $3,500 state rebate now, ASAP. And we're arguing that there in fact is state money available. The administration was saying, well, look, there was no money in that bill that was passed most recently, so we don't have to implement it yet. But they were pressed hard by Barrett and Cream, and especially on this point, Barrett and Cream said, if we pass the economic development bill here in the next month or two, can you agree that there would then be money and implement it immediately? And they pressed and forced the EEA people to say yes, that money could be available essentially instantly as soon as that economic development bill passed. Sorry about this long question, but I'll throw that to you.
No, it's a good question, and one that we've been trying in our own way to press for answers since that bill passed. So to the first part of your question, we know which vehicles meet the final assembly location requirement and the price requirement. So in that presentation I just gave, there are basically 3 vehicle requirements: final assembly, price, and batteries. We know right now, because we know what prices are, and we know where vehicles are manufactured, what vehicles will qualify for those 2 requirements starting January 1st. One caveat there is that it actually depends on how vehicles are classified. So there are some EVs out there where if the IRS decides they're an SUV, they qualify. If the IRS decides they're a car, they don't. But at least we know what the prices are, so we can make some guesses about which cars will meet those requirements. The thing that we don't know, and will hopefully know by January 1st, is which vehicles qualify for or meet the battery sourcing requirements for both the minerals and the components. So I think it's a fair guess that none will meet. I shouldn't even say that. I have no idea which vehicles will meet those requirements on January 1st and which don't, unless Senator Cream and Senator Barrett know some high up people at some car manufacturers. I don't think they know either, but what is absolutely fair to say is that fewer vehicles are eligible starting in January, well, starting really now, but especially starting in January, than have been in the past. So I think the point that they're making, that the state really needs to double down so that we can meet our own climate goals, and that we shouldn't just pat ourselves on the back that the IRA passed and so therefore we're all set with cars. I think that point is fair, but I don't think we can say that no cars will be eligible starting in January. The second point was about why we don't have those changes in effect already. So I can get real wonky about this if we want, but I think the short version is the climate bill that passed set up this new trust fund. It's like the Electric Vehicle Adoption Trust Fund. And it was like, here's this new fund, here are the rules. We're not going to put any money into it, because legislators put the language that would put money into that trust fund into the economic development bill, which did not end up passing. So right now they created a lovely bucket, but there's nothing in the bucket. And the debate that I think they were getting at in this hearing today is this bucket the same bucket as more EV, or is it a very similar bucket that sits next to the more EV bucket? And that is ultimately a legal debate, which I just wish somebody would care enough about to just settle and say, look, they're doing the same thing. In the end, smush them together, let's go. We don't have time to stall. But that it does not seem to be the way the conversation is going. But I will say that the Department of Energy Resources issued an RFP asking for proposals to manage this new program. And in the outline that they submitted with that RFP, the goal was to have the new program up and running by January 1st. We will see.
So I have a simpler question for you.
Okay, good.
I think it's simpler. So we had someone ask indirectly, you won't see it in the chat, about leaving a battery powered car or a plug-in hybrid for that matter, alone, not plugged in for several months during the winter. Do you have any guidance for that? Because the person who asked that question has had trouble with coming home and finding their battery completely dead and so forth.
Their EV battery.
Yeah,
So, the energy that is stored in the battery will decrease slightly over time if you leave it parked. Sort of just like with a gas-powered car, it's a good idea if you can take it for a spin around the block if it's sitting for months on end. The main issues that I have heard from people who drive electric vehicles is if they have something plugged into their diagnostic port on the vehicle, which for a while, if you were participating in a smart charging program with the electric utility, they would give you a gizmo to plug into this port that's under the steering wheel to draw information to send to them. And several people had that drain their batteries because it was drawing a tiny, tiny amount of energy. And it basically drained the auxiliary battery, not the big lithium ion battery, but the smaller one that like runs the radio and things like that. So I've heard of that. But in general, it shouldn't be a big problem to leave your car parked. And if it has been for you, I would like to hear more.
Okay.
Offline.
Okay, those are all the questions I currently have in the chat. Is there anything else before we wind up? This has been great. Yeah,
I want to say a big thank you. Do you have an email list for everyone who's on this? Should I send out an email with slides, or is it enough I can put my email in the chat, and if you would like the slides, you can email me?
yeah, do it that way. And,
Okay.
and I think everybody knows this will also be, the whole session will be on Stow TV beginning in about 2 days. And so people can go there and see it again, but that's really nice to be offer the slides too.
Of course. And everything that I talked about is at greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. So you can find it all there too.
It's great. Thank you very much. So, JL, any closing comments from you?
No, this was wonderful. I'm glad I got to be part of it this time. I'll have to make sure I jump in on the next one as well, even though Tina will be back to host. Thank you all for coming. And I believe the next one is November 16th. So please check back with us then.
All right.
Have a great night, everybody. And
Thank
thank you, Anna. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.